Hello, I'm Jeanne Solensky, librarian in the Downs collection of manuscripts and printed ephemera in the Winterthur Library. I earlier introduced you to the library's ephemera collections and their importance to research. Today, I'll focus on one item, a scrapbook house in the Grossman collection that includes many pieces of scrap, and deconstruct it to uncover more information. Like many scrapbooks in our collection, we don't know who created this. The only clue is the name Helen, in colorful letters inside the front cover. Most likely the name of its creator or its owner, not necessarily the same person. For the purpose of this talk, Helen will be referred to as the creator. There is also no known creation date. To understand more about this piece, I'll first turn to the practice of making scrapbook houses and then take a deep dive inside with a visual and technical analysis. So what exactly is a scrapbook house? It was a subgenre of scrapbooking, a very popular hobby in the late 1800s with the availability of so much printed material. A scrapbook house had a special purpose. It was also known at the time as a paper doll house and intended to provide special housing for loose paper dolls. So room settings were designed for dolls who were then glued onto pages or inserted into slits cut into the scraps, or kept loose inside for greater mobility among rooms during playtime. In another volume, two figures were glued onto one page shown here. I love that gigantic baby that throws off the proportions. So what was needed to create a scrapbook house? This photo from a 1905 book entitled The Children's Rainy Day Book shows young girls working on assembling an album. Children, teens, and even young adults could amuse themselves with this DIY hobby, a good antidote to inactivity and boredom. Any materials on hand, like magazines, newspapers, books, and store catalogs, could easily be reused, cut up, and arranged in any way. Pages could also be dressed up with wallpaper scraps, lace, and tissue paper. If help with instructions was needed, articles in women's magazines and newspapers, and books such as this one could be referenced. The earliest article I found was published in 1880 and the last one in 1910, wherein the author lamented that her childhood pastime was already old-fashioned. So we have a roughly 30-year time frame for the practice. A ledger, book, or other volume on hand could be repurposed. These pages shown are from two other volumes in our collection. The one on the left is the only collaged page in an 1875 geography textbook. Inside is written a woman's name with the date 1887. Could this be the name of the creator and date? Unfortunately, we cannot unequivocally make that determination. The second page is glued into an 1871 almanac, but again, could have been done at a later time, making dating these albums very tricky. The pastime became a victim of its own success when publishers cashed in on the craze with activity books like The House That Glue Built in the early 1900s. These books featured pre-made room settings with uncut sheets of figures and furnishings, the latter including numbers that matched a diagram for perfect placement. The finished pages undoubtedly produced a much more polished effect over handmade albums, but certainly robbed children of the thrill of the hunt and the freedom of choice. So let's return to Helen's scrapbook to uncover more from close observation. Immediately, we know Helen did not repurpose anything and instead purchased an album. Searching dozens of stationers' trade catalogs in our library's collections, I found a similar album in an 1891 catalog retailing for $7 per dozen, or approximately 58 cents each. The lettering of the embossed word album, the measurements of 15 inches high by 12 inches wide, and the number of leaves inside, 12, are the same. The 1891 date of the advertised album helps to narrow down that 30-year date range. Inside, Helen arranged pages in a logical manner, as dictated by published instructions that called for an exterior, a doorway, or a hall as the first page, then followed by rooms in order to simulate one's experience of moving through a house. You can already see a difference between Helen's scrapbook and the other pages I showed. her pages are covered with meticulous artistic arrangements. Her first 2 pages show exterior scenes with many structures, some European in nature, that symbolize the aspirational nature of these albums. The birds on both pages were most likely sourced from natural history textbooks. So now we'll look more closely at the page on the right. A research fellow featured this album in her dissertation on printcraft, her term for the 19th century practice of repurposing mass-produced images from printed sources into artistic collages, decoupages, and scrapbooks. During her research, Christina identified the scrap of a young girl mowing a lawn near a cluster of giant flowers as the cover of Peter Henderson and Company's 1889 seed catalog. Christina's find inspired me to hunt for more matches, starting with floral images in several dozen seed catalogs in the library's collection and other repositories' digital collections. Luckily, a second scrap of a seated child and dog on the same collaged page appeared on the cover of an 1890 catalog from the same firm. This same catalog supplied 5 other floral pieces in 2-bedroom scenes. Peter Henderson was in business in New York City from 1840 into the 20th century and operated a huge mail-order business for many decades, making one wonder if Helen lived nearby in the greater New York City area, or rather farther away with a great interest in gardening. Her location, unfortunately, remains inconclusive, but at least we have more evidence in support of an early 1890s date for the scrapbook. Hoping to discover more information on its contents, especially with the dates, I proposed the same album for a technical study by a graduate student in the art conservation program. Jeanne chose 2 adjacent pages depicting a reception area and a library or office for scientific testing with several instruments for their variety of materials and colorants. Keep an eye on the green pieces on both pages. In summary, the 57 items tested on both pages show a mix of lithographs and chromolithographs on both pigment-coated and uncoated papers, photographic prints, intaglio prints, and embossed and die-cut papers. Unfortunately, these items were likely mass-produced and so widely available for several decades in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that more definite dates could not be provided. However, Jeanne's technical analysis yielded other discoveries. XRF analysis showed copper, lead, and arsenic, with minor peaks for chromium, manganese, and iron. The combined detection of copper and arsenic in the green pieces suggests the presence of a toxic emerald green, later confirmed by compound identification with Raman spectroscopy. This green pigment was widely used in many 19th century wallpapers, paints, fabrics, and other common items. Our findings can now narrow down the creation date of this scrapbook house to the early 1890s, predicated on the comparable 1891 album and several identified scraps from the 1889 and 1890 seed catalogs. In comparison with other scrapbook houses in our collection, it is evident Helen had access to more high-end source material than other creators did. The pieces originated in printed sources and were not handmade. She bought a commercially made album solely for this activity, and her pages show a polished, cohesive artistic style. She was most likely from a higher socioeconomic class and older than other creators. With the pigments chrome yellow, emerald green, and likely lead white present in the scrapbook, care and handling is required until more is known about their toxicity bound within paper, paints, and coatings. It is strongly recommended to avoid touching suspect areas and practice good hygiene by wearing gloves and washing hands after handling. Fully encapsulate suspicious loose items in Mylar. Do not place any food or drink nearby when handling to eliminate the chance of cross-contamination. To learn more about our Conservation Department's investigation into toxic pigments, check out the wiki link to the Poison Book Project. So Helen's scrapbook and others are online. Check out our digital collections at contentdm.winterthur.org. I hope you enjoyed learning more about this scrapbook house and research at Winterthur.